Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Welcome back to Formula 1 news, and after the disastrous finish to the Bahrain Grand Prix for both Red Bull cars with Verstappen and Perez retiring just at the end of the race, the question has been there, what exactly went wrong for Red Bull powertrains? Helmut Marko believes they've discovered the cause of the issue and reckons they can fix it for Saudi Arabia. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you were new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Really upset the channel, thank you very much indeed for doing that. First of all, I do think this is kind of funny when Lewis kind of hopped off. I believe he explained this like, he had to go, like, man had to get the business done before the race got underway. Bottas didn't seem to be too worried about it. Like, if Lewis had somehow got off and sprained his ankle or something, I guess it could have been a bit of a disaster. Managed to get away with one though. But we do have to talk about this before we get into the Red Bull stuff, because there has been some talk about what the Grand Prix, circuit and calendar is going to look like in future seasons. The new Formula 1 boss reckons that there's enough interest right now. I think this kind of statistic or this kind of a quote has been taken, like, misrepresented to a degree, saying that kind of, implying that he wants 30 Grand Prix or whatever. I believe he was saying that effectively that there is the interest from different, parties and tracks and stuff to actually have 30 Grand Prix on the calendar. Not that that's going to be the case. I mean, 30 would certainly be pushing what is possible. Right now we have 23 this year. Like, I'm pretty sure they want to get it to like 24, 25. We believe a Las Vegas Grand Prix is going to come in as well, like a bit of a, hopefully, it's probably going to be the case, but hopefully it's not just an awful street track, which it more than likely will be. But I mean, still, that's the thing. Money talks at the end of the day, and there has been some concern about what actually is going to happen to some of the more classic tracks in Formula 1. Even the likes of Spa has been talked about as potentially being on the cusp of actually not making a return. That's the thing. You'd feel like the classic tracks, the likes of, Spa, Silverstone, like even something like a Suzuka and Interlagos, like Monaco, like these shouldn't really be going anywhere. But of course, especially Spa, right, being the best track on the calendar, at least in my opinion. But still, it's far from guaranteed that they will actually remain on the calendar going forward. I mean, that's the thing. There's been rumors that, the Las Vegas race is coming in soon. Like, apparently there's more hope for Spa to remain just because the whole Russia thing going on. This tweet also did mention that maybe an African Grand Prix could come in, which would be pretty cool as well. But that is, of course, the issue that, of course, you've got the oil money coming through, the American money, and it may end up kind of pushing out some of the classic tracks. So definitely there's been some talk about why that shouldn't be the case, why maybe it won't be the case, and you would well imagine they wouldn't make a decision like this. But I mean, yeah, still, we'll have to see how it goes. I mean, more races on the calendar, the better, at least for the fans, but not necessarily for the teams, right? Because it's very difficult to turn these cars around so quickly. The amount of double headers we have nowadays is kind of crazy compared to previous seasons. So, that's the thing. I guess they're going to keep going in this direction. It makes sense from a business standpoint, but it's maybe, difficult for the teams. I guess it's good for the fans, even though, there's so many weekends of Formula 1 that you have to, waste your weekends watching, I suppose, even though it's not really a waste. But, yeah, still, we'll see. Hopefully they get on good tracks, but I'm not so confident with the way things have been going the last few years. At least Saudi Arabia is actually a decent track. We'll have a look at some prelim stuff to that here in a few minutes' time. Just wanted to mention this as well as we kind of transition into Red Bull. This is a comparison they do between the last 2 years' cars. Thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, this is Verstappen's this year's car, Perez's last year car on the right-hand side. You can see how different the kind of lines are, right? How jagged the edges were of last year's car, like all the dirty air and the vortices that come spinning off these. Definitely been reduced to this year. I mean, we saw it this past weekend in Bahrain. The racing a lot better. I believe the cars on the left this year, at least in terms of pole lap, Verstappen's pole lap in Bahrain last year was, I think, a 1:28.9, and this year he did a 1:30.6, good enough for second, at 1/10 behind Leclerc, of course. So still, I think when these regulations were initially introduced, people expected these new cars to be like 3 seconds slower, 3-4 seconds slower. But so far, they've only been about a second and a half slower than they were last year. So, that's certainly promising, at least in terms of just pure pace. As the year progresses, things are going to get even better for these cars. But thought it was a cool comparison, really, of the last couple of years, and just how different they look, to be perfectly honest. Now, this is, of course, the big talk about Red Bull this past weekend. What caused them to go out of the race? The initial discussion was about the fuel pump, this kind of, generic part that every team has to use on their car that, potentially failed, even though it would be kind of suspicious if both of them had failed on the Red Bulls within a few laps of each other. So a lot of the talk was about the fact that, okay, do they have enough fuel in the car? Was there an issue with the fuel? That's what it seemed to be. The engines basically conked out for both vehicles right at the end of the race, as if they didn't have enough fuel left in the tank, which of course would be a kind of crazy mistake for a team like Red Bull to make. More than likely, there was some issue with either vaporization of the fuel or something, which seems to be the case. So Red Bull has looked into this. Of course, the FIA also very much wants to look into this because they kind of, they say that these fuel pumps are the parts you have to use. We talked a couple of days ago that supposedly the fuel pump was actually okay, and therefore it was another issue, maybe a Red Bull specific issue, which of course would be even worse for Red Bull, right? Because it's an issue that maybe they're being faced with, don't know what other teams have. And of course, they've only got a couple of days to turn things around here before the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That's the thing with having so many of these races on the calendar. But this is what was described in the article. So Helmut Marko, the chief advisor of Red Bull, he says, to put it simply, a vacuum in the fuel supply system caused the engine to run out of fuel. I think we can solve the problem in Saudi Arabia over the weekends. So that's the thing, without giving exact numbers, there was still enough enough petrol in the tanks of both cars. Now, the vacuum is not due to a problem from engine partner Honda, they reckon. Background, the petrol system, it consists partly of the standard parts, but of course there's also the stuff that Red Bull can get involved in themselves. So quite an interesting situation here, really. I think a lot of people are expecting it's something to do with the fact that we've got this new fuel in the engine, right? At least 10% of this new E10 sustainable biofuel type thing, which probably has different properties, especially when you're getting to the end of the tank. Like, of course, one easy solution to this, at least in theory, just put more fuel in the car, right? To make sure that by the end you still have enough, even if the kind of potentially vaporization causing a vacuum, whatever issues might be going down. Like, it's very possible that this E10 fuel, when it kind of vaporizes, which happens when the car is hot towards the end, you get a lot of vapor building up in the tanks of the fuel. And in those type of situations, maybe the E10 fuel operates slightly differently, as more corrosive, higher ethanol percentage. Like, who knows, right, exactly what happened here, but maybe it's an issue that could affect other teams as well, or maybe Red Bull just weren't quite as well prepared for it as other teams were, because seemingly other teams did some like low fuel runs in their practice sessions and in testing, and Red Bull didn't really do that, so maybe they were slightly less prepared as they could have been. And as I say, they could just put more fuel in the tank and that works, but of course some of the issues with that, you add weight, you don't want to add weight if you could at all avoid it, because putting the extra fuel in the tank will cost you, maybe a tenth of a second or lap or something like that, which obviously isn't ideal when Ferrari are very quick right now and potentially can actually get even quicker, because the discussion was here that, okay, the Ferrari engine has even given an advantage of like up to 0.4 seconds per lap, and apparently the kind of, the going rumor is that actually Ferrari weren't even running their engine at full power. They were running it in a quote-unquote conservative engine mode, which it was described right here. Supposedly the reason being that the degradation builds up quite rapidly in this Ferrari engine if it's running at full whack, but they believe they could get away with it in a conservative mode here at Bahrain, and if they've turned it up to full, like, it'd be even more powerful than it already is, which seems like kind of incredible to think about, right? And in fairness, on the straight line speeds, like, the Ferraris were actually not quite where the Red Bulls were. We saw, like, the way Verstappen was closing in very quickly on Leclerc down the straights. In fairness, part of that was because of the way Leclerc was driving, keeping it in 7th gear on the straights, braking very early into the braking zone so that Verstappen would get ahead into the DRS detection points, so we could get him back into turn 4. Very intelligent driving, but maybe doesn't give a full representation of how quick the Ferrari could go down the straights in that particular instance. But again, supposedly the Ferrari's got quite a bit more to give if they want to, because of course, and I believe there also some discussion, the fact that kind of in their second engine that they'll put in at some point or another, they've got a reliability upgrade coming through, so they can actually run it at a higher engine mode effectively, which look, if this is the case, definitely paints a kind of bleak picture for the competition, given where, Ferrari were this weekend, with potentially a fair bit more in the tank. And Mercedes, I'm sure, have a lot of work to do, as to Red Bull, to make sure that this issue that seemingly they have identified and believe they can get on top of, as Helmut Marko said, believe we can solve this in Saudi Arabia to ensure this doesn't continue to affect this team and potentially other teams as well, because it doesn't seem like an issue that could necessarily just be Red Bull specific. This also what Hamilton had to say ahead of this weekend, because of course the way the Saudi Arabia track is, with a lot of fast straights towards the end. When we went to Jeddah last year, we talked about the fact that, okay, yes, it should be a Mercedes favoured track at the time, because they had the better engine, they had the faster straight line speed towards the end of that year. Didn't necessarily work out quite as it did in Brazil, right? It was slightly more competitive, but in the end Hamilton managed to win the race regardless. But as he says, this year, the porpoising is definitely still going on. It's definitely not track specific. We still had the problem in Barcelona. He says it's not as bumpy as here. We still had the problem there. Bahrain is a bumpy track. We've had those longer straights. We anticipate in the next race, they have much longer straights there, right, in Saudi Arabia, all the way down the back straight. Basically 3 DRS zones in a row. We will have the same issue unless we fix it. There's a huge amount of people in the background that are working incredibly intelligently around the clock to try and come up with the right solutions. So yes, he's not particularly convinced, especially with the long straights in Saudi Arabia, that it's going to be a great race for Mercedes, because, with the porpoising, with the engine seemingly not being as good as the Ferraris is, with more to give from Ferrari, doesn't really paint the Mercedes itself or the Mercedes-powered teams in a particularly promising position going into Jeddah this coming weekend. Wanted to mention this as well, because certainly controversial was that, the F1 come out with their own power rankings after this weekend. They give Leclerc a 10, Magnussen gets second with a 9.6, unbelievable scenes, then Verstappen with a 9.2, Hamilton with an 8.6. Not really going to contradict this top stuff too much. I feel like some drivers, like at Russell, for example, Dano at 7.6, I feel like it's somewhat hard done by, just because I feel like Russell drove a pretty respectable race. Like, wasn't spectacular, but got up from P9 all the way to P4 in the end, right? Would have been P6. Like, I feel like he did his job, to be honest. Maybe I'm not deserving necessarily of being so low, but maybe you guys disagree. And Zhou Guanyu up here in 5th after, an 8.2. So pretty impressive stuff. Obviously, these are always going to be controversial, right? Whether the leading driver should get a 10 anyway, but I think Magnussen up here in 2nd, maybe. You'd just absolutely love to see it. Whether you can keep getting this much out of the Haas, because supposedly a lot of the talk in the paddock the last few days and past weekends was like, okay, the Haas-Ferrari relationship seems rather strong right now, and of course has been in previous years as well, and of course the Haas seems very good this year. So theorizing, okay, like a Ferrari giving away tips to the Haas effectively, other than just the very strong engine they seem to have in that car at the moment. And just to mention, this as we finish out, I believe this might be the first time in F1 history that that there's going to be 5 night races in a row, from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi last year, through to Bahrain, and back to Saudi Arabia this coming weekend. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.